All right, I think we can get going. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Assistant Dean for Admissions at the Yale School of Management. I'm also a proud graduate of Yale SOM from our MBA program, class of 2006. So I'm so pleased to be here today and joined by Professor Toby Moskowitz, who is our faculty director and professor of finance. As well as a principal at AQR Capital. And what I always like to share about Toby is that in addition to being a guru of all things investments, he somehow also finds the time to be an expert in sports analytics. And you should definitely check out his many guest appearances on the Freakonomics podcast if you have the chance. So we appreciate you spending the time with us today over the next hour or so to learn more about our Masters in Asset Management program. The program, which we formally call a Masters in Management Studies in Asset Management, is truly a unique program that exists only at Yale. So over the course of the next hour, we're looking forward to telling you about the program and what makes it distinctive from other finance programs that are out there. We'll talk to you about the kinds of candidates that we're looking to bring into the program and share a little bit about what you can expect out of the application process. We'll explore some career outcomes and potential career paths that you can take coming out of the program. And we have just welcomed our third cohort into the program this fall. And so I'll share a little bit of information about that group as well later on in the session. And of course, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. If you do have a question in mind along the way, you can feel free to use the Q&A function within Zoom, and we'll keep an eye on those and hopefully get to as many of your questions as possible towards the end. So before I pass things over to Professor Moskowitz to walk through the asset management program and what makes it so distinctive, I'm going to share a little bit about how this program fits into the larger university and the Yale SOM community and what it really means for you to be studying at Yale. So as a business school, Yale SOM is very much driven by our mission to educate leaders for business and society. It's at the core of everything we do across all of our programs, including the Masters in Asset Management. Our community cares both about being successful within their careers and having a positive impact on society, and really believe that our mission, which has been the founding mission of the school ever since it began, has really been never been more relevant than it is today. And so also of great importance to our community is the Yale School of Management's close connection to the greater university, Yale University. So when you join Yale SOM, you're really joining the broader Yale University community. And our programs all create strategic opportunities for engagement across campus, giving you access to the sharpest minds in academia, as well as to the resources that are part of a world-renowned institution here at Yale. And so all of our degree programs, including the Masters in Asset Management, allow you to take electives outside of Yale SOM, as well as giving you access to conferences and entrepreneurial resource and cultural events and guest speakers that are hosted by Yale University. So it's really a tremendous opportunity to learn and connect with people across a wide range of disciplines who have different areas of expertise, different ways of thinking that all add to your educational experience. And in this range of perspectives, this can be seen within the suite of Yale SOM academic programs as well. And so we actually offer many different degrees within the Yale School of Management. I'm not going to go through each one of them here, but the common theme here is that the Yale School of Management attracts business leaders from around the globe at various points in their careers and with numerous areas of expertise. And what this means for you is that all of these business leaders will ultimately become part of your Yale network when you join the university. So by coming to Yale, you'll be joining a community of students, faculty, and business professionals who care deeply about the major challenges that are facing business and society. And this is reflected in the full suite of programs that we offer. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Professor Moskowitz. I'll ask him to introduce himself quickly and to dive into our Masters in Asset Management program.
Thanks, Laurel. Welcome, everybody. I'm Toby Moskowitz. So thanks for joining us. I have been at Yale since 2016. And prior to that, I was at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business for 17 years. came out to Yale because I thought it was a great opportunity with being out here in Fairfield, New York, and obviously I'm a partner at AQR Capital, so combining those two worlds has been really great. And Yale has been a terrific partner in letting me, work with the practice of finance, as well as the academic side of finance, which was really the genesis of this program. And so to go way back, I had the very fortunate circumstance of being introduced to David Swenson when I first joined Yale back in 2016. Had a lunch with him and got to meet him, and obviously he was a legendary investor. And he had said, well, what are your ambitions for Yale? And those of you that don't know David's history at Yale, not only was he the great pioneer of the Yale model, which is something we teach here in the asset management program, but he also was an avid teacher. He really believed in educating students and taught for many decades in the Yale College and taught at SOM as well, various courses. And I had just mentioned that, for 10 years at the University of Chicago, I had always wanted to start a master's in finance dedicated specifically to asset management. There are other masters in finance programs out there, but there's nothing dedicated to the practice of asset management in particular. And it was really a meeting of the minds because David had said, I've always thought something like that should be provided, and Yale would be the perfect place to do it, but I've never had a partner to do this. And I said the same thing at Chicago. The problem was we had the academic side, but no connections to practice to really bring in that into the curriculum. And David generously said, would you like a partner in this? I'd love to develop this with you. And I couldn't believe my luck. So David and I spent the next 3 to 4 years outlining the curriculum, what we wanted to do with this program. I'll talk a bit more about that, but you'll really see it's a truly unique program. There is no other program in the world dedicated to asset management specifically. And I'll talk about those differences relative to things like financial engineering, financial mathematics, or even master's in finance programs. They're different. And I don't think there's any other program in the world that merges academia with practice. And although, with David's passing, obviously, we don't have his influence on the program anymore, but we do have his legacy, as well as all of the people he's worked with for many decades who still contribute to the program. And we still have that connection with it. So it's been a wonderful experience through our first 3 cohorts. So that's the genesis of the program. You'll see it throughout our curriculum. When you come here, you'll get a good dose of academic finance and theory, as well as how to actually practice it and use it. And as testament to that, when David Swenson first started managing money for Yale, he was a Jim Tobin student who won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was applying simple portfolio theory way back before anybody else to great effect, and then over time developed how to deploy academic theory into practice. And so we bring those two worlds together. So if we go to the next slide, what is this program? So the specifics of it, it is an intense program. It's a 2-semester, 9-month full-time program. It is STEM eligible. And don't kid yourselves. We're going to make you work really hard in those 9 months. This is an intense program. We try to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time. So you will hit the ground running. I would say it even begins before you hit campus. We typically provide a lot of summer pre-work that we, require some of it, and others we just strongly recommend, where you'll come to campus in late August, early September, and immediately hit the ground running and in these courses. So our motivation, though, and the real original motivation when I talked to David was there really is a need in the finance world for a program like this. David Swenson was frustrated with the fact that he had a lot of smart students coming out of Yale and other schools that he would hire even at the Yale Endowment Office. They were smart, but didn't know anything about finance, didn't know anything about markets, and he had to teach that all to them. My experience at AQR is very similar. We hire some of the best and brightest undergrads from all over the world. They're very sharp, but they don't know anything about how to practice finance or any of the theories behind finance. And so what most firms typically do, including at AQR, is we spend 18 months, a year, training these students in the practice of finance before they're even able to be productive in the firm. So we figured, David and I, why not start a program that did that for these companies and supplied you with a Yale degree to boot, and you could hit the ground running. And I think for the first 3 cohorts we've seen, talking to firms that have hired our students, that they're very productive on day one. And I know this from personal experience at AQR because we've hired a couple of students from this program. And from day one, we can plug them in and they can immediately be productive and do research. They know something, they can do some things. So in order to achieve that, it's going to be 9 months of intense work. And you're going to see from the curriculum that it will be a lot of work, but very rewarding, and you'll be very productive when you hit your jobs a year later. Now, part of that is, again, merging top finance scholars with leading investment managers. You'll see that throughout the curriculum. And it's based on a lot of the things that David and I developed together. So just to be clear, I come from a quant world. My work at AQR and my work in academia is quantitative investing, building models, economic models, using a lot of statistics and data, using a lot of quantitative methods. In fact, more and more, we're seeing things like machine learning and artificial intelligence enter the quant space. And we have one of the world's leading experts teaching courses in that, Brian Kelly, who runs machine learning at AQR, but is also a professor at Yale SOM. But in addition to that, we also have the other side of things, the fundamental side. And, David Swenson and I, although David has was trained in the doctoral program as a PhD in economics, he can do all the quant stuff. The way he approached investing was very different from a quant. It was fundamental analysis, more discretionary, more sort of, picking individual investments one-on-one. So you're going to get the best of both worlds. We want our students to be well equipped to go in either direction with both of those practices. So you'll see a good mix of those types of courses. If we go to the next slide, who is the program for? It's really designed for early career individuals. The way David and I thought about this program is we want students to come to us very early in their careers to learn how to do this the right way. And there's two respects with which I mean the right way. First and foremost, I mean it from an academic sense, which is learn how to practice and develop these models from the right way, from first principles, thinking about long-term diversification, thinking about doing things in a rigorous way with science, right? Where we have theory, we have data that informs that theory, and then we revise our theories and see if it matches the data better, all for the development of creating models that are useful for our clients. But we also want to do things the right way that's consistent with the mission of Yale School of Management and the mission that David himself pioneered at the Yale Endowment, which is to do things the right way in an ethical sense and the right way by society. What we're trying to do here is create future leaders in the financial industry who not only have the best tools to create the best financial products, but the ones that benefit society as well. And finance at its core is about allocating resources to their best uses that society thinks are the best uses. So when we make markets operate in a more efficient way, it provides capital to the places where we want it to go as a society. And thinking about that system as a whole is very powerful. David had a famous saying, which was, this is a great business where you can both do well and do good at the same time. And we firmly believe that. So while you're here at Yale, you will get courses on how to, not just how to crunch numbers and create quantitative models, but how to think about investing responsibly, how to think about investing for the benefit of your clients, having a fiduciary responsibility that says, look, our clients are partners. They're not somebody that we're trying to make money off of. We're going to make money with these partners. And when you do that, it can be a very lucrative career and a very rewarding career on a social aspect as well, where you're doing good for society and doing good for your clients. So we're going to combine both of those worlds. Now, in order to do that, students do need to have a good analytical background. Quantitative methods certainly help, but they're not necessary, although they do very much help. But a good analytical mind and willing to embrace some of the quantitative tools that we'll need, because it is a quantitative field. But we're going to see a mix of those things in the program. Going to the next slide. How is this program different from other programs that are out there? As I mentioned earlier, there is no other program focused purely on asset management. And even the other programs that have some elements of asset management, and don't get me wrong, there's some very good master's programs out there, but their focus is different. It's not purely on asset management. And even the courses they have on asset management, it's almost exclusively from the academic side. Our program is truly unique in its focus, as well as in who teaches in this program, where we have a mix of practitioners as well as academics bringing their thought leadership to Yale. You'll see a lot of courses that are taught separately by academics and practitioners, as well as a lot of courses that are co-taught together by a practitioner and an academic. And that merging of these two worlds is extremely powerful. You'll also see there's a unique slate of courses that we offer. We obviously have alternative asset classes and behavioral finance, a huge number of courses on ESG investing and different versions of impact investing. But we're also going to give you courses on the legal and regulatory landscape. We have a wonderful course taught by Lauren Kaplan, who was the head legal counsel at the Yale Endowment Office for many years, where she's going to talk about the legal landscape on things that haven't been invented yet, like how is the SEC likely to regulate cryptocurrencies? How are they going to think about reporting on ESG standards? What about social and diversity and equity inclusion objectives of investment managers? How is that regulatory landscape shaping and being changed? And these are very interesting topics that we don't have answers to yet, but students are going to be thinking about that in their coursework, which is going to benefit you when these things actually hit the policymakers a few years from now. And of course, you're going to learn methods in quantitative investing, and we're going to talk about all different kinds of asset classes: private equity, real estate, public markets, bond markets, stock markets, commodities, the whole gambit of investment opportunities. One of the key pieces that David and I came up with in the curriculum that we're very proud of is the Asset Management Colloquium, where about 4 times each semester, we bring in luminaries from the investment field to talk about their careers, what they're working on, and some of the challenges that they're grappling with even today. So this semester, for instance, we have Paula Valent, who runs Rockefeller and ran Bowdoin's endowment for many years, also one of our trustees here at Yale SOM, who'll be talking to our students on October 6th. We have Cliff Asness, the founder and managing partner of AQR Capital, who also started Global Alpha at Goldman Sachs, so has a very storied career and comes from the quant world. We have Mark Carhart, who is a founder and managing partner at Kipos Capital, where they're running some of the most innovative ESG portfolios that are out there, and a whole number of people that are coming to campus. And in fact, we've had Matt Mendelson come and speak, who took over from David running the Yale Endowment, and we're hoping to get him in the spring to come talk to our students as well. There is also an option for many of you who want to do an MBA and an asset management degree combined. You can do both programs in 2 years, which saves you a year. That is becoming increasingly popular. Laurel can give you more information about that. We can talk about that at the end, but that is also a nice degree where you want to combine the specifics of an asset management degree and all the tools with the general business practices of getting an MBA and managing. I view the MBA as a broad degree. That's a broad management degree, an excellent degree, and then combine that with the specifics that you're going to get from asset management, and that can be a very powerful combination. Going to the next slide. One of the things that we feel very strongly about versus the reason we started this program versus what was going on in the past is when at AQR, we trained our new hires in their own sort of boot camp. We would hire professors from the outside to come in and teach the kinds of courses we do at Yale, but it was done in kind of a slapshot sort of way, and it's unique to each firm. In fact, before AQR, I used to be hired as somebody who would go to Citadel and teach their new recruits, for 6 months in a boot camp of sorts of different methods. We think it's much better to have a more standardized view, one that's less idiosyncratic, that can apply to many firms. And that's why we created this program. Plus, you earn a degree from doing so. So less idiosyncratic firm-specific knowledge, you'll get that when you get to these firms, and more career and geographic mobility as a result. In addition, I've never seen, very little training that goes out there on the ethical and fiduciary considerations that are important here. We have courses in the law school taught by law school professors that talk about the legal and fiduciary responsibilities of investment management. And I think that's truly unique. So you're going to get a full spectrum of what the asset management industry looks like. And remember, this is for early career individuals. So the whole goal here is to set you up for a very successful career in the asset management industry for the next several decades, but learning how to do it right the first time. So going to the next slide, talk a little bit about the curriculum here, just to get into the specifics. We have some required lecture courses, 7-semester, half-semester courses, things like basic asset pricing theory, behavioral finance, econometrics and quant methods courses, a business ethics course. These are all required that everybody's going to take. These are the basic building blocks. David used to refer to these as first principles of asset management. Everybody has to know this stuff, okay? And then after those courses, students are allowed to design their own curriculum in the sense that they can pick elective courses. So those of you that want to go the quantitative route, you can take as many quant courses as you can stomach, and you can focus on those. Those that want to do more of a fundamental route can take more of the venture capital and private equity courses. Those that want to go more the law and regulation route can focus on those courses. Hedge fund strategies, portfolio management, the whole spectrum of different aspects of courses. In fact, I find that students they run out of time. They want to take more courses than they have time to take them. So you'll have to think about picking and choosing wisely where you want to spend your time and focus. But we have a full spectrum of courses that are offered, and not just at SOM. You're allowed to take courses outside of SOM, and many students do in the math department, the computer science department, certainly the economics department, and as I mentioned, the law school as well. And MBA electives are offered as well that you're allowed to take with permission that fit the curriculum of the asset management program. So I find that students they come up with very creative curricula that suit their needs, that help them with their interests and their job prospects. And I think some of your best resources will be to talk to former students and current students about some of the options that they currently pursue. The asset management colloquium is also required. That's a full year, but you'll want to do that. It's an intimate setting where you get to meet these speakers that are famous from the asset management world, talking about their careers and interact with them. And then we also have a practical experience requirement as well, which helps with CPT and helps with those issues as well. But it's also something that we think is critically important to developing a career in asset management, and that is to get some practical experience. We find that some students are able to do this part-time throughout the year, spending a few hours a week working with a firm or even with a professor sometimes. Other students will take 5 or 6 weeks in the winter break and do more of an intense practical experience. And a lot of them do it in the spring as well, where they're gaining some experience working with a firm, working with professors, working on a research project. And our career development office can help with all of this. And there'll be more talked about with respect to how to accomplish that, but very flexible on that dimension as well. And then if we go to the next slide, we also offer, as I mentioned, some joint degree options. One I already said, which is the MBA Asset Management Combination. We also have the Silver Scholars Program. These are for students coming directly out of undergraduate who will complete the MBA core curriculum in their first year, then do an extended internship in year 2, and then come back and use MBA electives to fulfill the asset management requirements. So they're going to get both degrees as well as the Silver Scholar designation. And that's becoming a more popular program as well. And there's lots of other combinations that you can construct here at Yale SOM with the asset management degree. So again, a lot of flexibility and a lot of options to further your careers. If we go to the next slide. In terms of the synergies and resources, I've already mentioned this. You have the entire Yale community to draw from. It's not just the asset management students, but we also have an executive MBA program in asset management. So these are individuals also in the asset management industry, but they've got 10 years of experience or more, and they're going to have a very different perspective. And we find that there's a lot of synergies between these two groups. For instance, some of the colloquia we're going to run this year are going to involve both the EMBA students and the asset management students who come at things from very, from unique perspectives, right? One, these are people that are in the middle of their careers versus those just starting in their careers, hearing from the same luminaries in this industry. And there's a lot of clubs where there's overlap between these two groups, as well as, of course, there's MBA clubs focused on investment management as well. And I think the interaction of the entire Yale community is one that's very vibrant in this space. I mentioned taking MBA elective courses, of course, and of course, you'll always get the ongoing support from the Career Development Office, who supports all of these programs in finding jobs and internships. And most of all, you'll get some interaction with the Yale finance faculty, as well as the practitioners that come to campus. And we also have the wonderful International Center for Finance, which is an institute that supports research in finance and runs all kinds of really nice conferences and programs. And some of our students actually end up doing some research assistance for the ICF as part of their practical experience, which is another option that you can go. And then, of course, our ties with the Yale Investment Office as well. Finally, on the last slide, before I turn it back over to Laurel, is what we hope you'll achieve through this program is a way of achieving your ultimate goals faster, right? To get you, like I said, if you're hired at AQR or Citadel or any of these other firms or an endowment office at another university, you'll be able to hit the ground running and be productive from day one. We see global career opportunities all over the world. We've placed students all over the world in various different parts, and you'll see that it's a very global community, the program itself. People come from all over the world to join this program. That provides a wide range of job functions. You see buy-side, sell-side jobs, investment management jobs, private equity, venture capital, sales and trading, even commercial banking, and consulting and risk management. So we've seen students placed in all these different positions. And some of our students even use this as a springboard to get a PhD in finance. I think every year, in the 3 years we've been running this, we have 1 or 2 students who want to go the PhD route, and we're thrilled with that as well. So let me turn it over to Laurel, who can talk a bit more about the specifics of applying and what the classes look like. And again, thank you for being here, and I'll be around to answer some questions should they come up. Laurel,
Great.
It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Toby. Thank you for that. And so, as I mentioned before, we did just this past month welcome our cohort of the class of 2024. It was 57 students, and I expect that class size to be kind of in that range, continuing into the next couple of application cycles. It goes up and down a little bit based on how many joint degree candidates we have with our MBA program, but we welcomed 57 this year. A remarkable 53% of our class are women, which is really fantastic in this space, not necessarily typical for a finance-oriented degree. So very proud of that. The class represents 15 different countries of citizenship. We have students coming from Lithuania, Finland, Mexico, India, the UK, China, Canada, the US, literally a global program, which is really exciting to have in one place. And with that, 95% of our students speak 2 or more languages. So again, a really sort of fascinating place to be. We mentioned that joint degree a couple of times. We have 11 joint degree candidates within that group of 57 students this year. Some of them in the traditional MBA program, some of them in that Silver Scholars program that Toby mentioned, which is for students coming directly out of their undergrad experience. So happy to talk a little bit more about that if there are questions along the way. And this gives you a little bit of a sense of the work distribution of the incoming class. So about 2/3 of the class is coming to us directly out of an undergraduate experience, or potentially out of a master's program tacked right onto an undergraduate experience. And so as Toby mentioned, this is an early career program, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is only for people coming directly out of that undergraduate experience. So the other 2/3 of the cohort have some degree of work experience, some of them coming in with very light 1 to 2 years of experience, but a good 20% of the class coming in with more than that. So we like to think of this as an early career program, meaning either early in your actual career, or another way of thinking about it is early in your asset management career. So if you've gained a little bit of experience in another area, whether it's in the asset management field or perhaps something else in finance or something else entirely, but are ready to make that turn into the entry point into your asset management career, then we welcome you to apply to this program. And before we open to Q&A, I'd like to offer just a few words on the application process itself. I'll start by saying in the coming weeks and months, we offer a lot of events that are specifically focused on the application, and we'll dig into all of the aspects of the application in a lot more depth. So if you have questions or interested in learning more about any of this, we'll try to get to some of them today, and I'll give you an overview, but there's lots of opportunity in the coming weeks and months to dive into the application process a little bit more. But what I want to give you today is really more of an overview of the process and in broad strokes, what we're looking for in candidates. So I like to keep things simple. When it comes down to it, we're really looking for three things out of all of our applicants. We're looking for your academic preparedness with a particular lens of assessing your quantitative preparedness, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Second, we're looking for your professional impact and potential as demonstrated through the work experience that you may have had to date. But for those of you who aren't coming in with full-time work experience, we're looking at your extracurricular involvement, your personal interests, the ways in which you've gained applied experience along the way. And then third, which I know came through in spades through what Tobias shared with you, is a desire to make an impact in the field of asset management immediately after graduating from the program and beyond. So each element of your application that you see here really aids the admissions committee in our assessment of one or more of these dimensions. And we look at all of this information together holistically to pull the information that we need, given each of your own unique academic histories and professional experience and personal backgrounds. And what this really means at the end of the day is there's no one ideal candidate for the asset management program, but rather students can come from a variety of different academic and professional backgrounds and find success within the program. So I'll speak just a little bit on each of those components. Academically, we're looking to set candidates up for success in an academically rigorous program. And so that means that we're looking for evidence of strong academic performance in your studies to date, no matter what that particular area of study that you focused on might have been. And in fact, we welcome students from all backgrounds and areas of study. There's no particular majors that are preferable to others, and evidence of intellectual curiosity and exposure to different areas in your study is viewed as a positive. And while the program is clearly not focused exclusively on quantitative concepts, as Toby mentioned, a certain level of preparedness in quantitative subject matter will give you the foundation that you really need in order to dive into the coursework. So in the application process, we'll look to understand what exposure that you've had to date. And it may be that you have studied finance or economics or mathematics or statistics, and naturally you'll have a good deal of quantitative exposure in your curriculum from your undergrad degree. But it's also possible that maybe you studied engineering or chemistry or even earned a liberal arts degree, but you've had exposure to statistics or some applied math along the way, either through your curriculum or through internship exposure on the job. So we're really looking at all of this in tandem. We're looking at your transcripts and not just your GPA at the end. We really dig into all of your coursework and how you did there. We'll ask you a lot of information about your quantitative preparation within the application, and I know this can be a little intimidating if you haven't had all of it, but part of it is we really are just trying to assess what you've done to date. We'll admit lots of people who haven't had exposure to every area we ask about, but we give you an option to prep for that over the summer before you get to the program. So helps us understand that. We get lots of questions about test scores. Test scores are not everything. They are one predictor of academic success in a business program, but they're not the be-all, end-all. We tend to rely on those indicators a little bit more if you haven't had the course exposure previously. But as part of holistic admissions, we're looking at all of it together. And the other thing that we're looking at for your academics is we will ask you for 2 letters of recommendation, and one of them will come from an academic setting and one of them will come from a more professional or applied setting. And so that academic letter of recommendation is another important indicator for us of your classroom potential. In terms of assessing your professional potential and impact, like I said before, we're meeting you where you are. Some of you are going to be coming directly from your undergrad experience, and so you're not necessarily going to have full-time work to date, but you've likely engaged in some kind of professional internships or academic research and extracurricular activities, personal pursuits. You've applied yourself in a lot of different ways. And those obviously who have full-time work will want to highlight those experience. And as I mentioned before, it's early to your asset management career. So we're meeting you where you are. Let's see. We are looking at your resume, your letter of recommendation from that professional or applied setting, as well as the activities that you've chosen to pursue outside of your professional endeavors, all to get a sense of that professional impact that we're hoping you'll have. And then lastly, your interest and passion for the field of asset management. So as you've heard, this program really is distinct among master's degrees in finance due to its unique focus on asset management, both the theory and the practice. And so we want to understand what drives your individual interest in this field and how you envision pursuing those interests after you launch a career in this space. And so we'll ask you an essay question that directly addresses this. We'll look at the types of activities and experiences you've had to date. Again, it's not a requirement that you've had asset management exposure or roles, but if you have, it's certainly evidence of your interest in the area. And then lastly, we have a interview by invitation process. The interview will touch upon a number of different areas, but it's a really valuable place for us to get to know a little bit more about your interests specifically in the field of asset management. That interview, if you are invited, would be conducted by a member of the admissions community, either a committee member or a group that helps us with the interview process. And like I said, it's an opportunity to delve a little further into your background and interests. I'll just mention real quickly a couple of other components of the application. If you are a non-native English speaker, we'll require a TOEFL or an IELTS score. Everybody who applies will do two fairly unique components of our admissions process. We have video questions and our behavioral assessments. Once again, we have a number of events that dive into the application specifics a lot more, so I'm not going to dwell on either of these here, but the video questions are an opportunity for us to hear you respond to some spoken and written prompts and get a sense of how you articulate yourself on your feet. It's also a good assessment for English language skills. And then the behavioral assessment is another kind of unique component of the application. It's not something that requires any advanced preparation, but it's an online test that takes about 25 or so minutes to complete and gives us a sense of the interpersonal and intrapersonal skills that you have that are predictive of success in a management school environment. So that makes up our application process. We have one single application deadline on January 10th. And so after that deadline, our committee will start reviewing applications. We won't start reviewing before. So no great advantage to getting it in too far ahead of the deadline. And we will issue interview invitations over the course of the next several weeks, and we'll notify all candidates of the admissions decision on March 26th. So all happens pretty quickly. We often get questions about scholarships. So all admitted applicants are automatically considered for a merit-based scholarship. There's no additional consideration process that you need to apply for outside of that, no separate essay or anything like that. And we choose our scholarship recipients based on the very same admissions factors I've already mentioned and the perspective that you will add to the class. And you'll be notified of scholarship decisions at the same time as admission. And so I think with that, it would be a good time to open it up to questions. I'm going to stop my share for a moment so I have a better view of the questions that are coming in. And I'm very happy to answer admissions questions, but like I said, we have a number of events where we will focus on that. So I'd love to also have some questions while we have Toby's time with us today that he could probably uniquely answer. And so with that, just give me a moment to look through some of the questions that have come through. And for those who joined a little bit late, if you do have questions, if you could use the Q&A function to ask those, that would be wonderful. Lots of admissions questions. So I'm gonna ask a question about, maybe uh, I'll give this one to Toby first, and then I can weigh in for from an admissions perspective. So someone who has 2 years of work experience in VC, 8 in total in similar topics, but no investments. Is this program right for me, or is it really targeted more towards recent graduates?
That's a good question. I think it could be right for you, especially if you're trying to start a career in asset management and really get those tools. And I think that experience that you have could be very valuable. But I think the key would be, what do you want the degree for? If you're trying to launch a new career specifically in the asset management of VC and asset management of private equity, I think it can be very valuable. And I think your experience would be great. We have had students with that level of experience. If I'm not mistaken, Laurel, there's a couple that have had, more than 5 years experience, even closer to 10. It's not the norm for sure, but they've done quite well. And I think, it just really depends what you want to do with the degree and what your ambitions are. Laurel, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on as well. And again, from an admissions perspective, we're meeting you where you are. So if you've got 8 to 10 years of work experience, we're assessing where you are in your progression and the impact that you've had in that amount of time. And if you're coming in with a series of internships, again, that's sort of, we're assessing you at the level of experience that you've got. So I think it's more of a self-determination. Are you ready to take, a pause in an 8 to 10 year career that you've had so far to kind of step back, come back to school and make that kind of pivot. So I think that's more of a question on the applicant's part of whether this program fits into their plans versus the program not being appropriate for someone with that level of experience. Okay, again, I'll come back to some of the admissions related ones in a moment, but I'm going to punt this one to Toby. So what advice would you offer to a recent graduate seeking guidance on navigating the field of quantitative finance and identifying the most suitable specialization?
That's a really good question. I get asked that question a lot. I think, what I would suggest is take as many, if you're interested in the quant space, we have a lot of different quantitative courses to offer. And I would take as many of them as possible to get exposed to as many things in the quant space as you can. So for instance, you'll be forced to take my quant course. So we'll start there with some basic methods, as well as Brian Kelly's, more stats course. And we just hired someone, Tice Jensen, who's teaching for the first time and doing a wonderful job so far, at least according to the students. They seem to really like him. And he's teaching a quant methods basic course. But in addition to that, there's courses in fixed income if you want to specialize on the fixed income side, in macro strategies, in hedge fund strategies. There's some in derivatives. So you can fill your entire 9 months with lots of quant courses if that's the direction you want to go, and then decide, do I want to go to a shop that specializes in one area, or do I want to go to, like, the firm I work with, AQR, where we do quant methods applied to all asset classes, everything but private equity, I would say. And there's even some, I've heard of anyway, some small shops that are trying to apply quant methods to the private equity space. So I think all of that is possible. And I would encourage you to explore a lot of those different courses and see what you get excited about and where you think you can make a contribution.
Great, thank you, Toby. Sort of continuing the themes of quantitative investing. So could you speak a little bit to the different types of quant investing? This participant said it's a field that doesn't have as much public information compared to fundamental finance.
Yeah, although I'm not sure that last statement is true, but I can certainly speak to there's certainly different approaches to quant investing. I mean, at its core, I think of quantitative investing is a better term for it is systematic investing, where we have a set of rules or methods or models that guide what we do as an investment firm. I think there are different flavors. There's kind of a pure statistical approach. So for instance, in my course, it's guided by economic principles. So in my course, we build economic models. That's what we do at AQR. But you also will take a pure stats, sort of more stats related course. Brian Kelly's, I think, is a mixture of economics and statistics and methods that guides that exploration. And so you'll get a mixture of kind of pure stats and math versus kind of economic models. And at the end of the day, it's a mixture of these things that tends to be successful. We'll also talk about, I do this in my course, some of the bad quantitative approaches. I view a completely unstructured, data-driven approach doesn't work very well in our field. We can get into the specifics why, but we have a low signal to noise problem in financial markets. We don't have the luxury of trillions of data points that you get at a Google or an Amazon. Stock markets only open up a single day, and it changes every day. So there's not a lot of repeated experiments that you get to do in financial markets. The markets just evolve and they're dynamic. But we'll talk about the methods that you can approach to the field of finance, quantitative and non-quantitative, that look at these things. So I think while you're here, if you're interested in the quant space, you will get different versions of this. I think you'll get a healthy debate. It's not like we all agree on everything. I have very healthy debates with my colleagues and with practitioners. But I think the point is, when you come here, you'll learn how to think about these issues, and you'll come to your own conclusions, and you'll get a set of tools that you can apply and answer questions to. And I think, you'll probably leave this. I think the goal is to have you leave here a year from now with the ability to ask and answer questions, but not all those questions will have answers yet. It's up to you to do those over your careers. And that's, I think, the approach you ought to take, whether it's on the quant side or the fundamental side. You'll get exposed to lots of different ways to do this.
So there are a lot of professional certificates out there in the realm of finance, CFA and CMT and lots of other acronyms. What's the benefit of doing a program like this versus pursuing one of those professional certifications, which obviously you could do simultaneously with working and your other engagements?
Yeah, I think it's. Do you want to answer that, Laurel, or do you want me to? I can certainly start.
I'll let you answer that.
I was going to say, look, I think those certificates. I'll be honest, those certificates, you study so that you pass the exam. I don't think you learn a whole lot from those. I think it's more about memorizing enough to get the score that you need to get the certificate. There's a reason that people want to get certified in those things, but it's not a substitute for being immersed in a full-time program where you're taught how to think, not what to think, right? Those exams give you a list of questions that you just say, look, I have to know the answer to this, I have to know the answer to that, and I have to get a certain percentage to get it right so I can get certified. We're going to teach you how to think. And the reason that's important is because whatever's on the CFA exam now, 10 years from now, it's going to look very different, but you're going to have the tools and the methods to be able to understand why we care about those things. Those certificates don't do any of that. And look, let's face it, you're probably going to end up doing both because you need to get certified on some of these things. But first, learn how to think and how to approach the world in the investment management business. These are just the details that you just need to pass some exams. So I view them as totally different, completely different, in my opinion.
I think that's a great answer, and I get asked from an admissions perspective frequently as well, whether whether these factor into our decisions. And where I actually see it factoring the most is just maybe a demonstration of your commitment. And it probably is in sync with some of the other activities and opportunities that you're pursuing. It's demonstrating an interest to kind of get the credential that you may very well need in order to pursue certain routes. But I think in terms of the material in and of itself, I think we have better indicators within your within the experiences that you've had versus the actual the content of these degrees. So in a moment I'm gonna do an admissions lightning round because we have so many admissions questions here as well. But I like this one, Toby, as well.
One more thought. Sorry, Laurel, yeah. One more thought on that last question. The other thing I was going to say is something you'll never get on any of those certificate exams is the following. How do I figure out when I have let's suppose I have a great portfolio I want to offer my clients. How do I figure out how to size it, how to market it, how to think about, how to talk about it with my clients, and how to hedge the risk of that. None of that's going to be covered on these exams. There's nothing sort of fundamental to what you're trying to do when you build an asset management career or an asset management firm that's going to be covered in those exams. Those exams are going to cover things like how are stocks traded? What are the margin requirements on shorting? Those are details. You'll learn that in your career. You'll learn that for these exams, but not the fundamental idea of how do we meet our clients' goals and how do we do it in the most efficient way? And then how do we think about the competition that's doing that? And how do we think about all those are the kinds of things that we're going to get you to think about in this program. So I just can't emphasize enough how fundamentally different I think the two things are, and you're going to need both. Sorry, Laurel, please go ahead.
Yeah, no. That's a great addition there. I'm going to sort of combine a couple of questions here. So a question about your opinion on what this program can do for someone who has the ambition to start his or her own fund or multifamily office after graduation. I'm going to sort of lump that in with another question, which I'll have you take a stab at and I can share as well as, it sounds like a number of grads have gone into quant positions to date. And how important is it to SOM to construct a cohort that has diverse interests in the area of asset management? So maybe a two-part, how does a degree set you up to do maybe this specific area, but more generally, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the types of career paths people have taken, but what's our goals for creating a sort of diversified pathway on the output side of this program?
Yeah, so I think for sure you're going to get the set of skills and tools to help you if you want to start your own asset management firm or family office. You can certainly do that. In fact, as we've said numerous times, this is for early career individuals to think about how to launch a career in asset management, in the asset management industry across all aspects, the legal, the client, as well as the tools and methods. So I think for sure that can be the case. And then in terms of outcomes, it is true that a lot of students, I think of these programs typically as a path to get a quantitative job. Our aspirations and our hope, and I think we've seen that with some of our students, is that many will go towards a fundamental shop. And actually, many of our students have. They've joined VC firms, private equity firms. One of those, I will say, being perfectly honest, when you look at it from an academic perspective, most finance professors know the quant stuff, don't really know the fundamental stuff. And I think we're probably the only program out there that even has some fundamental coursework coming from the practical side. But I'll be honest, I think we would like to have more, and we're in the process of trying to attract more people who can deliver that content, which will help in terms of the curriculum. In terms of the outcomes, we know our career development office is well aware that there's a group of students that want those outcomes, and we are, continuing to improve our list of firms that are hiring from this program. And we're now in our third year, and word of mouth is certainly helping, but we're continuing to grow that side. But certainly that's the goal. The goal is to have, students with diverse sets of outcomes. And we're just talking about quant versus fundamental, but we also think about it in terms of asset classes, different asset classes, public and private markets, different, sides of the market, buy versus sell side, some working for endowments and foundations and nonprofits, others working at hedge funds. We want a rich set of people in this space, a diverse set.
Great, Toby. And I'll weigh in on sort of the cohort shaping piece of it. So I'll say, having worked in MBA admissions for enough years, I've learned that I've learned not to trust what are stated as career aspirations in an application, and not to say that they're made up or not well thought out, but rather that I believe so deeply in the transformative nature of graduate management education that it would be unfair for us to hold you to the things that you aspired to do before you had a chance to get the exposure that you will have when you join a business school. And I think, that applies very much to the asset management program as well. We obviously want to understand that your interests have been developed and you understand why you're pursuing this highly specialized degree, but to have figured out the exact sort of niche of asset management that you want to go into before having had exposure to all of these wonderful experiences and courses and colloquium speakers and whatnot that you'll have within the program, that wouldn't be a fair expectation on our part. So we're really not crafting a class in terms of your interests. I'm not, we're not looking to say, okay, this many people want to be endowment managers versus working on a buy-side fund or whatever it might be. It's more, we ask you those questions more to understand what your thought process has been that has brought you this far, but we're excited to see people go off into all different directions once they've joined the program. I am...
I was gonna say that typically happens too. I'm thinking of one student from last year who came in just absolutely hell-bent on doing fundamental analysis at a venture capital firm, took a quant class and said, it just spoke to me. And now he's actually doing a postdoc thinking about a PhD in finance, going the full, just it completely changed his view of the world. And he thought, I never thought I'd like this stuff, but boy, does it interest me. And we've had students go the other direction. So I think Laurel makes an excellent point, which is come here with an open mind, be exposed to everything and see what really gets you going and what you're really excited about. Because that may change.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And that's a best case scenario, right? To have really kind of opened someone's eyes in that way. I love that. All right, so I'm going to bang through a bunch of questions very, very quickly that are sort of around themes. So a lot of questions around, I've got some aspect of my application I'm worried about. Maybe it's a lower GPA, maybe it's a lower kind of period within my undergrad or a low score. All of these are very common. And so I'll emphasize here, we really do review your applications holistically. We're really looking to make the best case for everybody. And so, like I said before, if you've focused quantitatively in your undergraduate work, we're probably looking at that score a little bit less. We're relying on it more, particularly that quant aspect of it, if you haven't studied the material before. And so, be self-aware, know where you need to sort of focus your attention, but we don't have cutoffs or kind of lines beneath which we're not going to consider an application. We really do dive into the whole thing. We share our class profile online. We try to give our kind of ranges there, but remember, that's not everybody we admitted. That's everyone who's showing up in the class. And so I tend to advise people don't get too hung up on those profiles. They're a very sort of small snapshot, but they give you a sense of where, if you say, I'm kind of out of the range for one thing, you'll want to work on kind of bolstering another to kind of balance it out. Let's see. Some questions around kind of having specific backgrounds. I'll just say very blanket once again, there's no particular majors or types of backgrounds that are required for this, and we don't even favor one particular area or even broadly speaking STEM backgrounds. I think there tends to be a lot of people who have focused in econ or finance or I guess a little bit more broadly STEM majors, because not surprisingly, there's a greater overlap, I think, in interest with the content here, but we are very, very open to people coming from lots of different backgrounds. Oh, this is interesting. Is there a joint degree between asset management and the master's in systemic risk? There's not. Those would be, I guess, two separate one-degree programs. I hate to rule anything out. I'm trying to think about whether there would be a logic to doing each of those independently. Personally speaking, I would probably say, focusing on one or the other and then launching into the path that makes sense for you from there would make the most sense. But I wouldn't preclude there being some logic to pursuing the two of them sequentially. Toby, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I suppose you could. We haven't seen that. I have seen a few students who, from the systemic risk program who take some asset management courses and vice versa. That makes sense. I mean, for example, if you're interested in fixed income, strategies in the asset management program, you probably do want to take some of the central bank courses that are offered in systemic risk. And a lot of our students do that. But I don't know that we've seen, someone getting both degrees. But I'm with Laurel. I wouldn't rule it out. If someone wanted to make the case why it makes sense for their career, I think we would listen.
Yeah. A couple questions about the joint degree. So I'll share the MBA asset management joint degree. You apply separately through each of those processes. So you'll identify within each application that you're interested in pursuing the joint degree, but it's two completely separate admissions processes that could have the same or different outcomes. It doesn't make things easier or harder either way to apply, again, two completely independent processes and outcomes. I think the part that maybe is a little bit more relevant is as you're outlining your career interests and your career aspirations, you'll want to talk about why that dual degree makes sense within the context of what it is that you want to accomplish. Applications are not processed on a rolling basis. So whenever you apply, we will start reviewing applications on that January 10th deadline. So no advantages there. You have to have quant prep before the courses start. So again, we will assess your quantitative background, and I don't want to say it doesn't matter to the degree to which you've had quantitative prep. I think it's certainly an advantage in the application process to have had exposure and done well in the various quantitative coursework that we outline within our application for you to describe. So I don't think it's not as though it's irrelevant, but I want to emphasize once again that not having that exposure doesn't mean that you don't have a chance of admission. Candidates who don't have that exposure obviously will be looking for other strong suits within their application that round that out. And we will provide opportunity for you to gain some of that exposure to kind of get on the level before starting your classes. And then I should mention, this past year, everyone who entered the asset management class went through a programming boot camp specifically in Python to get up to speed there, just because that sort of skill set is critical enough that we want to ensure the entire group coming in has exposure. I want to be mindful of time. I know we're a little bit over our time already, and so I think I'm going to conclude with one question that I'll pass over to Toby. And like I said, I hope if you do have questions about the application process, we have lots of resources out there, even just within the application itself, very detailed instructions that answer a lot of the questions that I see here, but also events specifically tailored towards that. And so you'll see opportunity to engage that in our event page. But while we have Toby here, maybe a good concluding question is, what are some of the common characteristics that you see in great asset managers?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say, the best asset managers that I've seen have two things in common, which is an intense curiosity for trying to understand markets and understand how markets work and how prices move, and an incredible work ethic, right? Just almost like a relentlessness in trying to understand that. And when they do that, they will seek tools that help them understand that. They will develop their own tools that help them do that. They will think about it. But it's that, that curiosity, that ability to ask interesting questions to understand financial markets better, and the pursuit of trying to answer those questions. And what we're going to try to do in the 9 months we have you is teach you how to ask those questions, try to spark that curiosity, and then give you at least a starting point on some of the ways in which you go about answering those questions. But this is a lifetime, pursuit. So it doesn't just end when you leave Yale. We want to give you a starting point to think about these things, and then you're going to develop this over the next 20 or 30 years. And I think David Swenson said it best. One of the things he said he loves about this profession is that he can wake up every day and there's always and something's changed and there's something new to think about.